January 17th, 1945. A single kerosene lamp flickers in a farmhouse cellar 20 kilometers west of the Vistula River. General Walther Nehring hunches over a meteorological chart, his breath visible in the frozen air, tracing isobars with a pencil stub. Outside, 800,000 Soviet troops are massing in the darkness. Nehring's 24th Panzer Corps, Germany's last operational armored reserve in Poland, sits fueled, loaded, and ready. The attack order is drafted. All that remains is the weather window. Within 6 hours, Nehring will commit his forces based on a forecast predicting ground fog and low cloud that will blind Soviet air support. The forecast is wrong. By noon, the skies will be crystalline blue. Soviet Sturmoviks will arrive in waves of 40. Nehring's panzers will burn in open fields, and with them, Germany's final chance to halt the drive on Berlin. But this disaster begins not with a misread chart, but with a doctrine that made such errors inevitable. By January 1945, the WWII Eastern Front is a mathematical equation with only one solution: collapse. Since June 1944, Germany has lost 1.2 million men, 4,000 tanks, and 3,000 aircraft in the east. Soviet forces outnumber German defenders 4-1 in infantry, 6-1 in armor, and 10-1 in artillery. The Red Army advances an average of 12 kilometers per day. At this rate, Soviet spearheads will reach the Oder River, Germany's last natural barrier before Berlin, by February 1st. The Wehrmacht's only hope lies in operational reserves, concentrated armored formations held back from the front, committed only at decisive moments to blunt breakthroughs and buy time. This is the essence of mobile defense, the doctrine that has kept Germany alive since Kursk. But mobile defense depends on one critical variable: timing. Commit reserves too early, and they are ground down in static fighting. Commit too late, and the breakthrough becomes irreversible. The decision of when and where to strike requires perfect intelligence, enemy dispositions, logistics, and above all, weather. In January 1945, German meteorological services are crippled. Weather stations across occupied Europe have been overrun. Atlantic observation ships are sunk or recalled. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights are rare and often intercepted. German forecasters rely on fragmentary data, extrapolation, and guesswork. The system is structurally blind. Yet the High Command continues to plan operations as if forecasts are reliable. No contingency protocols exist for forecast failure. No doctrine addresses what happens when the weather betrays you. The institution assumes its information is good enough because it must be good enough. Into this fragile system steps Walther Nehring. Nehring is not a maverick by temperament. A career panzer officer, he commanded divisions in France and Africa, corps in Russia. He is methodical, cautious, and deeply orthodox. But by 1945, he has learned a lesson the General Staff has not: weather kills. In December 1944, Nehring's corps was ordered to counterattack Soviet bridgeheads across the Narew River. The attack was planned for early morning, when forecasters predicted fog would conceal German movements. The fog never came. Soviet artillery observers had clear sight lines. Nehring lost 60 tanks in 4 hours and gained nothing. He began keeping his own weather log, recording forecasts alongside actual conditions. Over 6 weeks, he documented a pattern. German meteorological reports consistently overpredicted cloud cover and underpredicted visibility. The bias was systematic. Forecasters, working with incomplete data and under pressure to support offensive operations, erred toward optimism. They told commanders what doctrine required: windows of opportunity. Nehring's log told a different story. Of 14 forecasts predicting low visibility, only 3 were accurate. The rest promised concealment and delivered exposure. Nehring drafted a memo to Army Group, Center Headquarters. He proposed a simple rule. Any operation dependent on poor weather should assume clear skies and plan accordingly. If fog arrives, it is a bonus. If it does not, forces are not caught in the open. The memo was filed and ignored. Doctrine did not accommodate pessimistic planning. On January 12, 1945, the Soviet Vistula Oder Offensive begins. 2 million men, 6,000 tanks, and 46,000 guns smash through German lines on a 500-kilometer front. Within 3 days, Soviet spearheads penetrate 60 kilometers. Army Group Center disintegrates. Nehring's 24th Panzer Corps, held in reserve near Lodz, becomes the last intact armored formation in Poland. On January 16th, Nehring receives orders. Prepare to counterattack the northern shoulder of the Soviet breakthrough, targeting the flank of Marshal Zhukov's 1st Belarusian Front. The objective is to sever Soviet supply lines and force a temporary halt. The attack is scheduled for January 17th at dawn. Nehring requests a meteorological briefing. The forecast, delivered by a Luftwaffe liaison officer reading from a teletype, predicts ground fog and cloud ceiling below 200 meters until midday. Visibility: less than 1 kilometer. Soviet air support will be grounded. Nehring asks for confidence level. The officer has no answer. Forecasts do not include confidence intervals. Nehring pulls out his weather log. Over the past month, every forecast predicting extended morning fog has been wrong by at least 3 hours. He calculates, if the fog clears by 9 a.m. instead of noon, his panzers will be exposed in open terrain for 3 hours under clear skies. Soviet ground attack aircraft can reach the area in 20 minutes. He requests a 12-hour delay to allow for forecast error. The request is denied. Army Group Headquarters insists the attack proceed as planned. Delay risks Soviet forces consolidating their gains. Nehring is told the meteorological service is confident. He is told to trust the forecast. At 6:15 a.m., Nehring's panzers roll forward. Fog blankets the fields. Visibility is 50 meters. The lead elements, 120 Panther and Panzer IV tanks, accompanied by Panzer Grenadiers in half-tracks, advance in column, guided by compass bearings. Soviet positions are overrun in the murk. By 7:30 a.m., German forces penetrate 8 kilometers. Resistance is light. Soviet units, surprised and blinded, fall back in confusion. Nehring's gamble appears to be working. Then, at 8:10 a.m., the fog begins to lift. Not gradually, but in sudden patches. By 8:40 a.m., visibility extends to 2 kilometers. By 9:05 a.m., the sky is cloudless. Nehring's tanks are strung out across open farmland, silhouetted against snow. At 9:17 a.m., the first Soviet aircraft appear. Il-2 Sturmoviks, flying in groups of 8, begin systematic runs. Each carries 8 RS-82 rockets and 2 23mm cannons. The panzers have no air cover. Luftwaffe fighters, grounded by fuel shortages, cannot respond. German flak units are kilometers behind, still moving forward. The tanks are alone. Nehring orders dispersion and attempts to continue the advance, hoping to reach wooded terrain 5 kilometers ahead. But the Sturmoviks are relentless. They circle, dive, fire, climb, and return. Rockets punch through turret roofs. Cannon fire shreds engine decks. Tanks that survive the first pass are hit on the second or third. Crews bail out and are strafed in the snow. By 10:30 a.m., Nehring counts 47 tanks destroyed or immobilized. He orders withdrawal. The retreat is chaos. Tanks reverse through their own supply columns. Half-tracks collide. Soviet ground forces, recovering from the initial shock, begin pursuing. Artillery fire walks across the withdrawal routes. By nightfall, Nehring's corps has lost 96 tanks, 38 half-tracks, and over 200 men. The counterattack achieves nothing. The consequences unfold with brutal speed. Without Nehring's corps to threaten their flank, Soviet forces accelerate westward. On January 19th, Zhukov's tanks cross the pre-war German border. On January 25th, they reach Poznan, encircling the city. On January 31st, lead elements of the First Belarusian Front reach the Oder River, 60 kilometers from Berlin. The distance covered in 19 days would have taken 3 months in 1944. Germany's eastern defenses, designed around the assumption that armored reserves could contain breakthroughs, collapse because the reserves no longer exist. Nehring's corps, rebuilt over 6 months at enormous cost, is gutted in 4 hours because a weather forecast missed by 3 hours. The operational impact is catastrophic, but the human cost is worse. The failure to halt the Soviet advance at the Vistula dooms millions. As the Red Army sweeps west, German civilians flee in columns that stretch for hundreds of kilometers. Refugees are caught on frozen roads by Soviet tanks. Thousands drown when ice on the Vistula and Oder breaks under the weight of fleeing crowds. Entire towns are encircled and subjected to weeks of siege. Breslau, bypassed by Soviet spearheads, holds out until May, its population reduced from 600,000 to 200,000 by starvation and bombardment. The speed of the Soviet advance also seals the fate of German forces still fighting in East Prussia and Courland. Cut off by the drive to the Oder, these armies, over 500,000 men, are trapped against the Baltic. They will fight until May, but their destruction is certain from the moment Nehring's counterattack fails. The collapse of the Vistula line also eliminates any possibility of a negotiated settlement. In early January 1945, some within the German leadership still hope that a successful defensive stand might convince the Western Allies to seek a separate peace. The Vistula-Oder offensive destroys that illusion. By February, it is clear Germany will be occupied, partitioned, and its leadership tried. The war's final outcome is no longer in doubt. The only question is how many will die before the end. Nehring survives the war. In post-war interrogations, he is asked why the counterattack proceeded despite his doubts about the weather. His answer is simple. He was ordered to trust the forecast, and he obeyed. When pressed on whether he should have refused the order, he replies that refusal would have meant relief of command and court-martial, and the attack would have proceeded anyway under a different officer. The system permitted no dissent. Interrogators review Nehring's weather log, now part of captured German records. Analysis confirms his findings. German meteorological forecasts on the Eastern Front in late 1944 and early 1945 overpredicted cloud cover in 68% of cases, with an average error of 3.2 hours in fog dissipation time. The bias was never corrected because no feedback mechanism existed. Forecasters were not systematically compared against actual conditions. Operational failures were attributed to enemy action or bad luck, not bad data. The institution optimized for hope, not accuracy. Modern military meteorology treats forecast confidence as rigorously as the forecast itself. NATO doctrine requires probabilistic forecasts, not fog until noon, but 60% chance fog persists past 10 a.m. Operations are planned with contingency branches for each scenario. The lesson was learned at immense cost in fields west of the Vistula, where 96 tanks burned because a weather report was 3 hours wrong. If you've ever trusted a forecast and been caught in the rain, hit that like button. If you've ever wondered how a single bad prediction can change history, subscribe. Because in war, The difference between fog and clear skies isn't just weather, it's the difference between survival and annihilation. And sometimes, the most dangerous enemy isn't the one you can see. It's the one your own maps promised wouldn't be there.